Enfants reaches Deprimes begs the question, would you spend $700 on a t-shirt that says something like puppy safe from opioid overdose or nihilistic babies on fentanyl from the future? ERD is one of the most popular brands today, known for blending dark, esoteric, edgy, punk imagery with beautiful luxury couture. ERD is a brand that's rich with referential and intercontextual imagery that most of its customer base does not understand. There have been so many times in my life where I've said to somebody, nice Steve Albini shirt, or nice Godflesh tote, or nice Eroticism by George Bataille shirt. And I will see the person look back at me and say, actually, it's Enfants reaches Deprimes. If Nirvana brought punk to mainstream music, ERD is bringing punk to wealthy foreign exchange students. And in many respects, I think that's one of their core goals, at least for hitting their revenue markers every year. I mean, the name of the brand quite literally translates to pressed rich kids. And while the brand has been written off as for rich kids LARPing as punks, I think the brand actually has a lot more going for it than that. I don't even know if it really makes sense to call ERD a punk brand at this point. I think that kind of conversation does a disservice to the interesting world that the brand's founder, Henry Alexander Levy, has begun to create. The world ERD is creating is artistically way more ambitious than just punk references. And I want to dive into that today. Now, just a bit of a warning before we get into the meat of the video. ERD is extremely dark, and its themes are pretty challenging and sometimes disturbing. And if you're looking for a video that shies away from that kind of content, or maybe is just a bit more lighthearted, this video is probably not going to be for you, just as an FYI. My guess is that if you know what ERD is, you know that already, as we dissect the philosophy of ERD. ERD, or Enfants reaches Deprimes, was founded by Henry Alexander Levy in 2012. Henry Alexander Levy grew up in Atlanta in a wealthy Jewish family that had made their fortune off of a water filtration business. Henry grew up extremely affluent. He went to some of the most prestigious boarding prep schools in his youth. While it may seem like Henry had everything, Henry has spoken pretty openly at how the experience at these boarding schools was really a rough environment for him. Sort of created a loss of childhood for him and ripped him away from his own identity, which he was interested in forming through skating, painting, and punk culture. These high-stakes boarding prep schools were really difficult for him to adapt to, being a young, developing creative, and this resulted in Henry using drugs to cope with this at a very young age. Henry spent much of his teenage years struggling with drug addiction, bouncing from boarding school to different rehab facilities. Eventually, he was able to beat addiction for a short period of time and ended up at UCLA in the arts program there. By the time he was 21, he was finding that his creative practices were pushing him to start a clothing brand. Thus, he founded Enfants reaches Deprimes in 2012. For him, ERD was about bringing the punk aesthetics and sensibilities that he enjoyed in his youth to the luxury world. He was quoted that he wanted to create the punk version of Hermes. Those early years of ERD and its rise mainly sees the brand as streetwear brand, selling printed shirts, hoodies, and customized leather jackets. The brand gained popularity for its outlandish graphics that were centered around drug usage with often punk references attached, whether it be Germs, Black Flag, or a myriad of other classic punk bands and imagery. The brand was extremely controversial, not only because of the vulgarity and nihilism associated with many of the graphics, but also because of the nature of the brand feeling so antithetical from the source material it was drawing from. Punk is historically sort of a blue-collar cultural expression with roots in strong rejections of capitalism. And to use that same imagery, those signs and symbols, to create an $800 t-shirt seemingly was a betrayal of those values. This stirred up a lot of controversy for the brand, which actually made it more popular. For Henry Alexander Levy, the context of these images is removed for him. He reinterprets the signs and symbols that have been historically used to represent the pain of class oppression to instead represent the pain of his own drug abuse and past. What Henry does is extract the symbol's core emotion, pain, and reinterprets the pain of that symbol through his own narrative of pain. A lot of people have problems with this, but this isn't as necessarily as uncommon as you think. One of the most popular contemporary postmodern thinkers and philosophers today, Jean Baudrillard, actually covers this phenomenon extensively in his book, Simulacra and Simulation, where he talks about how signs and symbols are often reinterpreted and misinterpreted from their original meaning in our contemporary society because of media, and how this is actually a pretty common phenomenon. While the brand was gaining a lot of success and traction, Henry unfortunately seemed to have relapsed with his drug addiction. And because of that, when you look at the first collections, the major theme and what the core of the brand seems to be about is drug use. He's gone on record to say that during this period he was a self-described junkie, and junkie culture was really at the center of the brand. First few years of ERD were something more out of a William Burroughs novel than what could be expected out of a luxury fashion house. Henry was able to get sober again end of the 2010s, investing more of his time and energy instead in ERD as a brand and his own personal art. As Henry sobered up and putting his energy more positively into his own artistic expression and the brand, you really see ERD transform and evolve and become a lot more artistically ambitious. I know one thing I notice about ERD is a lot of cultural commentators haven't really been able to notice how the brand has evolved since its early years. And many people are stuck in this narrative or criticism that the brand is still just selling $700 t-shirts when the brand is a lot more ambitious at this point. The references have become a lot more esoteric and layered in meaning. Various homicides, drugs you haven't heard of, bands you've never listened to, erotic literature most of you are too young to read. The themes and references from Christine F. to Psychic TV, Death in June,
Roland S. Howard, Typo Negative,
Sade. And I'm not talking about the Sade that sings, I'm talking about the 16th century French author who wrote the famous novel 120 Days in Sodom. The imagery and references that ERD is playing with at this point are a lot more nuanced. ERD is starting to build a world that feels distinctly more unique than the punk-inspired streetwear that ERD started out with in its early years. It's a dramatic and impressive feat to see how far Henry has taken ERD. From moving out of simply creating streetwear to creating something much more akin to a true luxury fashion house. Creating elegant suiting, launching itself fully into women's wear, creating full lines of accessories, handbags, footwear, opening stores in Seoul, Paris, opening a bookstore, various record releases and book releases. The world ERD is building is impressive and spanning. If you're looking for creating a world in fashion, ERD is one of the best to do it in recent years. While in its early years, ERD was often associated with nihilism. I think a better case for the philosophy of ERD now is surrealism. Nihilism is a philosophy that rejects all moral principles. It's heavily associated with punk and drug use. And while early ERD designs certainly gave off this attitude, and I think you could consider it as a nihilistic brand in those early years, as the brand has developed, I think it's become a lot more complex and nuanced than that, and has become something more similar to the artistic philosophy of surrealism. Surrealism is an artistic philosophy that is deeply shaped by psychology. It started off in the 1900s, and surrealism looks to delve into the unconscious mind and dreams. Dreams often defy logical rules and are irrational, and the philosophy of surrealist art is to capture the subconscious and to express it. And the world that ERD is creating certainly seems to be surrealist in this sense. A lot of the figures and scenes and campaigns are off-putting and surrealist. They don't make sense. They feel dreamlike and hazy. There's an essence to where it's a bit disturbing as well. One of the biggest artistic influences, I think, on ERD is the work of David Lynch. It's pretty easy to see this not only from the fact that if you look at various ERD pieces, you can see scenes from Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet everywhere, but also just in the way that often these video and photo campaigns are structured, have the spirit of David Lynch's surrealism in it. The off-putting surrealism of David Lynch is ever present in this Baroque melody of clothing, and their increasingly experimental subversive presentations stand out as far as any anything else goes in fashion today. There's not really anyone else in fashion who has built a world this unique, and it's this disturbing, distorted, nightmarish, dreamlike look at the luxury and upper class. However, that just because it's disturbing doesn't mean there isn't beauty and elegance in it. While in the early years the brand certainly was edgy, you'd be hard-pressed to call ERD's early years beautiful or romantic. But now I think it's a really integral part of the brand and the brand's identity, is fixating on this dichotomy between the profane and vulgar and the beautiful and romantic. ERD has really embraced this harsh contrast. ERD sort of feels like a profane or vulgar romantic affair, and I think a lot of the references echo that as well. Think again about David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, the work of George Bataille. Keep this video away from an NC-17 rating. I'd encourage you to do your own research on that one. But ERD has certainly embraced beauty, though Henry has kept the brand continually as provocative or subversive as ever. ERD feeds off controversy, and I think that's one of the reasons it's the most popular brands today. ERD has no problem making the canceled or controversial the center of their own campaigns. Ariel Pink, a notoriously canceled figure, as well as Marilyn Manson, have both been at the center of campaigns. There are shirts referencing the controversial filmmaker Roman Polanski, as well as some hats and imagery inspired by the songs of Mark Kozelek, who was also canceled, who was the frontman of both Sun Kil Moon and Red House Painters. ERD has no problem making canceled or considered politically incorrect or just generally controversial figures the center of their imagery and campaigns, which might be some of the reason some large fashion establishments tend to not do a lot of features on them. It is very much in the spirit of past provocateurs. For example, many bands used the image of Charles Manson in the 70s and the 80s. While we may be numb to it now, when a band like Black Flag used the imagery of Charles Manson, it would have had a similar effect to us seeing some of these figures today. It would have been seen as highly offensive and politically incorrect. Henry's controversial streak is not just in line with past punk provocateurs like Black Flag, but it's very culturally in line with counterculture today as well. In sort of the same cultural vogue of the dime square rejection of wokeism, I suppose is the best way of saying it. Sort of think about podcasts like Red Scare, comedians like Nick Mullen or Adam Friedland, who try to provoke or challenge the social norms set up by neoliberal identity politics. Henry Alexander Levy exists in a similar spirit to them. Hyper-political correctness has become the mainstream and dominant cultural force. It makes sense that ERD, having these subversive, irreverent sensibilities that challenge that notion, has become a countercultural force to be reckoned with. Though there has been a lot of criticism of the brand because of that. Whether you like it or not, or you think it's appropriate or not, is kind of up to you. What can't be denied though is ERD has become an extremely relevant because of this perspective. Surrealism, beauty, elegance, and being a provocateur are all generally important hallmarks of Henry's brand. One of the main themes that I really want to dig into today is probably its most controversial. As the brand has developed, it's been clear that the brand is evolving in a world that deals with themes of fascism, oppression, and Jewish identity. The brand's past couple of collections have really been nestled in a specific time period and setting. Many of the garments, the setting, the imagery that the brand uses references the period in Europe in the early 1900s, specifically around the 1910s through the 1940s. It deals with the world of the upper class of Europe, this sort of elegant, what you might call pseudo-nobility or pseudo-aristocracy, the world that existed pre-World War II. ERD has really nestled itself into this world consistently, referencing historical garments from this era and military uniforms from this period for at least the past 4 shows since spring 2024. It's not just this elegant nobility though, but it's also about Jewish identity and fascism that is all over these collections. For example, the invitation for their last collection was Hebrew text with the image of a Nazi officer on horseback. The collection itself featured banners with the German Iron Cross and included children driving in on a tank. The collection before that was called Dictatorship, and besides fascist Nazi imagery being featured, there were also images of Joseph Stalin, Mao, and other famous dictators. And many of the pieces in that collection also hearkened to fascist uniforms and military uniforms of that time. One of their last holiday campaigns featured a figure resembling a Gestapo officer with period-accurate German firearms, seemingly hunting down a beautiful aristocratic-looking woman in the Swiss Alps. Many of the garments of the last few collections have this sort of military elegance to them that doesn't exclusively echo Nazi uniforms, but sometimes very clearly do, or at least mimic and toe the line. They recently released a shirt that just has a Nazi officer on it. There are countless pieces that feature either Hebrew text or more specifically Yiddish. And listen, that's only the tip of the iceberg. You could hunt it down, it's basically everywhere. Now, of course, I want to be clear, Levy is not only making characters that seem to be fascist or have fascist leaning, but there's also a great variety of characters who appear to be clearly Jewish, who are holding mementos which have Hebrew written on them. This would be considered politically inappropriate because of, instead of treating this time period with reverence for the tragedy like most culture normally does, Levy seems to want to romanticize it, make it beautiful, elegant, and romantic. This is, politically speaking, very, very taboo. But from my understanding, Levy is of Jewish heritage. So it leads me to reason and think he isn't just making these references to be an edgelord, but my guess is he has something to say about this subject that isn't entirely just nihilistic. So here lies the big question about the philosophy of ERD. Why does ERD take this period of immense tragedy and want to bring beauty and elegance and romanticize it? To understand what Levy might be saying, we have to turn back to the work of Jean Baudrillard, and again, specifically in his book, Simulacra and Simulation. And particularly, there is a chapter in this book titled Holocaust. Jean Baudrillard was a philosopher who studied how media, specifically photo, video, television, and movies, distort our perceptions of reality. A really easy example of this is, I want you to imagine a castle. You probably thought of something like this, the Disney castle. That's not what most castles look like. Most castles would look like a fortified city. And so you see these fantastical depictions, or simulacra, as Jean Baudrillard called them, are often what exists instead of reality. Jean Baudrillard and his book and general hypothesis is that media distorts our understanding of reality. Signs and symbols, they are pictures or movies that are trying to portray something accurately, often create a false or fantastical narrative about historical events. Oftentimes that's not because they're completely inaccurate, but more often they lose important pieces of context. And slowly over time, our perceptions of historical events become hyper-reality or fantasy. Because the nature of media, movies, TV shows, or memorialization can't capture the full nuances of historical narrative. In this chapter on the Holocaust, it wants to show us that through the media we watch and the memorialization we experience around the Holocaust, the average person doesn't really have a full notion or understanding of the devastation or cultural impact. Now, I'm gonna read a little excerpt from the chapter, and the chapter in specific is referencing a mini television series that was made about the Holocaust in the 70s, and how Baudrillard comes to understand that the current media narratives around the Holocaust forget a huge part of the fuller picture.
Forgetting extermination is part of extermination because it is also the extermination of memory, of history, of the social, etc. This forgetting is essential as the event. In this case, unlocatable by us, inaccessible to us and its truth. This forgetting is still too dangerous. It must be effaced by an artificial memory. This artificial memory will be the restaging of extermination, but late, much too late for it to be able to make any real waves. One lacks stakes, investment, history, speech. That is the fundamental problem. The objective is thus to produce them at all costs. And this broadcast served this purpose: to capture the artificial heat of a dead event to warm the dead body of the social.
The films and the memorialization we experience that try to capture the tragedy that makes, as John Baudrillard would say, the tragedy immortal, often does make the tragedy immortal to some sense. But they don't remind us the fuller extent of the situation and the personal and cultural impacts of the extermination. We often don't see the reality of the people before they were persecuted and the types of people that they were in our current depictions of the Holocaust. We see the Holocaust as the camps, the suffering, the tragedy, the smokestacks, the trains. But the simulacra or media often doesn't portray the devastation to Jewish culture, identity, and the lives of the individuals before the tragedy. When we learn about the rise of Nazism, one of the things that we often learn about is how they burned books. And it's really important because they didn't just burn books because they hated Jewish people and wanted to just burn it out of a sort of self-loathing or hate, but the book burnings were essential because they were destroying the evidence of Jewish intellectualism and Jewish beauty, culture, and art. The Holocaust did not start with direct violence or persecution, but instead the Holocaust started as a culture war. Pre-Nazi rule, Jewish identity and culture was heavily linked with elegance, intellectualism, art, and beauty. Very much the world and elements that we see the characters of ERD inhabit. Many Jewish people pre-Nazi persecution were extremely wealthy and were some of the greatest contributors to European culture, whether it be through being patrons of art, being artists themselves, writers of poetry, philosophy. Some of the greatest contributions to beauty in Germany and broader Europe were from Jewish people. It's a huge part that's essential to understanding the Holocaust narrative. But I think the average person would be hard-pressed to name 3 Jewish authors or artists from this time period, but would be able to name some of the concentration camps, which I think shows a big part of the problem with our current narrative. Nazis were obsessed with the concept of beauty, and I don't think this would come off as a shock to anybody. After all, the Nazis famously commissioned fashion designer Hugo Boss to design the uniforms. The Nazis believed heavily in aesthetics and beauty, and it's an essential part of fascism, their pursuit of beauty and aesthetics. And so when Jewish people who they wanted to scapegoat and persecute possessed what was seemingly more beauty than the Nazi party, Jewish people had more cultural capital. That was deeply troubling to Nazi officials. So the first step of the Holocaust was to strip away beauty and the evidence of beauty and cultural capital from the Jewish people. Books were burned, art and paintings were seized, Jewish people were banned from participating in the creation of art in these circles, publishing art became heavily censored by the Nazi state, and a big reason for that was to keep Jewish beauty, Jewish art, away from the eyes of their fellow Germans. Basically, the Nazis did their best to destroy any evidence of the beauty or the art or the cultural capital of Jewish people, to remove sort of this image that Jewish people had this elegance to them or had cultural capital. And in a sense, the Nazis were really able to control this narrative well. So well, in fact, that Baudrillard points out that this is part of the problem with our current depictions of the Holocaust. In our simulacra or current depictions in the media, we often lose this essential piece of the narrative of how the Nazis felt that they could be the only cultural force that could possess beauty. A huge part of the Holocaust was stripping the beauty and identity which was deeply rooted in the Jewish people away. We often instead see a narrative of the beauty-obsessed Nazis and their victims. And I want to point out, to remember someone only as a victim is not with full personhood. And when we come to ERD as a brand, we see them cover this subject wrapped in a sort of beauty and romanticization. And I think it sort of brings to light what we often forget about the Holocaust narrative, that those beginning years of the Holocaust was a culture war, and it was the battleground was about beauty and culture. There was elegance and a lot of cultural capital and beauty to the Jewish people, and the Nazis were very much competing with them for this notion of cultural capital and beauty. There was a lot of romance and poetry and great works of art that lived among and were massive precursors to this tragedy. And so the world Henry Alexander creates brings beauty back into the conversation of this tragedy. And I think in a sense it actually does give way to a more humanizing conversation about the tragedy, though it is really challenging. An element of why it's so challenging for us today to confront beauty in this time period is because of how the Nazis perverted and hijacked the concept of beauty in culture as a whole. So much of the context and narrative was lost about beauty before the war. And what was sort of left was these Nazi artifacts which distorted and attributed beauty to Nazism. If you're more curious about that, Elaine Scarry has this great book here called On Beauty and Being Just. Part of what she describes is how much of contemporary culture has abandoned notions of traditional beauty or romance as a reaction to the fascism of the Nazi Party. In art circles and contemporary culture after World War II, traditional beauty became heavily associated with oppression. The way of expression became untraditional expressions of beauty. And so in many ways, most people are not comfortable even addressing more traditional standards of beauty because of the fear of these standards being associated with fascism. It's interesting because the work of ERD becomes dually redemptive then in two ways for beauty. First of all, living in the romantic and beautiful space that Henry Alexander Levy does is immensely countercultural, especially in consideration with our postmodern conceptions of beauty. But to go to the root of where this disparity came from, to approach the Holocaust, this great taboo, and to remember it first as a cultural war on beauty, and to reconfigure it to remember the victims' amazing cultural capital, and whose lives were unfortunately cut short, is redemptive as well. ERD remind us of this very lost and important narrative that the precursor to oppression is to strip away your beauty and culture. And this is why it's important to resist censorship at every corner. Defending free speech and art is one of the utmost important ways to fight oppression. Defending beauty and expression is an incredibly important thing. And I think that's sort of the message ERD is trying to sort of get out and confront with its most recent collections. ERD is well on its way to becoming one of the most important luxury houses of the 2020s, and it certainly is one of the most culturally relevant.
Thank you guys so much for watching the video today. If you want to learn more about ERD, I would definitely recommend this YouTuber named Kai. He just breaks down as many references as he can regarding ERD, and his content was actually really helpful for me to research this video. So shout out to Kai. Definitely go check out his content if you want to learn more about ERD. Again, my name is Karsten Kraning, and I also make clothes as well, which I'll link down in the bio. Thank you again for watching this video, and have a great day.